This episode of the Better Two podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and Needom, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Today's episode is part 2 of Douglas Hughes' interview. Doug's interview, well, it was kind of long. We ended up talking a total of 4 hours, 2 of those off camera. So I could have had a much longer podcast. But I cut it so that you guys would not be overwhelmed. And I hope you guys find some information, some fun, some interesting facts, and understand what he was trying to do. Sometimes, a protest, civil disobedience isn't always a bad thing if done the right way. And he wasn't looking to hurt anybody. He wasn't looking to get in trouble with anybody. He just wanted to get his point across. And make a statement about campaign lobbying. And I can't blame him. So check it out. When I discovered Buzzsprout, I was about 30 or 40 episodes already in. And I thought, I really think they have a lot of opportunities here and a lot of options for me to explore. But it's going to be a lot of work to move the podcast. Wrong. It was so simple. It was a click of the button and everything transferred over seamlessly. And bonus, I got a website out of it, a website that has all my social media links for the podcast, and everything in there is central in one place. What could be more convenient? I mean, honestly. Then, besides that, a couple of clicks of buttons and I'm on every major platform. It was simple. And you want to build your audience. You want to be on every platform you can. And also the other thing was analytics. The analytics were top of the line. So if you have a podcast already and you want to move it, I would highly recommend doing it with Buzzsprout. And if you're new to the podcasting business, Buzzsprout is the way to go. And right now, if you follow the link in the show notes and tell Buzzsprout we sent you, it'll get you a $20 gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, which helps support our show. And we would greatly appreciate it. The only thing is, remember, before you freak out if you don't get it after you get one paid month, it takes 2 before you get that Amazon gift card. So check Buzzsprout out. I'm sure you would be happy. And let's create something together and come over to Buzzsprout. It's intriguing because wasn't the country founded on civil disobedience? We left Britain because we didn't like what was going on over there.
If the Boston Tea Party isn't an example of civil disobedience, but in that case, they did property damage that I refuse to do.
Yeah. It's ironic. And we think that free speech, and that goes back to Citizen United, but we think free speech will protect us. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't always. And for those who do not know Citizen United's verdict, because I know there's some people that listen that are not hip on politics. Citizens United, the verdict was all about speech. Money equals speech. So therefore, money equals free speech. So basically, you can pay somebody. Yeah, corporations can pay people for speech. And it's not necessarily.
It was decided on the basis that you cannot limit free speech, that you cannot limit corporations participating in contributing to campaigns, but they were cool about it. They said corporations can't give directly to a campaign. They can have a PAC, or what we now call super PAC, okay? And they can put unlimited amounts of money into a super PAC, and it's not under the direct control of the candidate. Well, the corporations don't want the candidate to have direct control. He's working for them. They want to go ahead and put their marketing experts on how that money is going to be spent. And oftentimes that super PAC money is not spent to get somebody elected, it's spent to get somebody defeated.
Right. Okay. And that's where you get your smear ads and everything else. And this also gave us that corporations are people for the most part too.
They can't quite vote. Okay.
Right.
They can only influence hundreds of thousands of votes in the volume of money that they put in. Okay. But you got to make up for the fact that here you have a big corporation with a revenue in billions of dollars per year. And, the founding fathers didn't give them the right to vote. So you got to even it out somehow. sorry, the CEO can vote once. All of the shareholders can vote once, but they know they're outweighed by the votes of the hundreds of thousands of people who are sometimes required to buy that product in a monopoly situation. Okay. So they don't want democracy. Okay. They want the corporation to have the power to affect the low information voter with the sheer volume of information or disinformation or flat out explicit lies that they put out about a candidate. Okay. And it's all legal and it's all okay. Here in Florida at the state level, okay, they're just discovering that the utility companies were behind funding ghost candidates. These ghost candidates are real people who have the same name as the person that they want to defeat. Okay? So if you have a green energy Fred Smith and you want the Republican to beat him, you find a Fred Smith who lives in that district and you pay him to run. Okay? And then sometimes it's the same name, sometimes it's a similar name, but it's just intended to siphon off a percentage of votes because the voters can't remember who it was they wanted to vote for. Okay? Electric companies put huge amounts of money, dark money, which they had hoped would be untraceable, into, in several cases, funding these ghost candidates in order to get a person defeated. And by some strange coincidence, the utility companies are asking for an 18% rate increase next year. Okay.
Ding, ding, ding.
Gee, but I don't think those have anything to do with each other.
No, not at all. No.
The utility companies for profit, they're struggling. Just look at their financial statements to see how badly they're struggling for their second Maserati. Okay. Yeah. They're making a killing. Okay. And yes, they are throwing huge amounts of monies into the electoral system to prevent us from having candidates that will represent us instead of representing the corporations.
Well, and they're definitely against solar. I mean, that's been talked about before, that the power companies are definitely against solar. People having their own
in
solar
North Carolina,
panels.
and I believe it was through ALEC, okay, they proposed but didn't pass a law that would have prohibited solar panels on buildings that were more than, I don't remember what it was, 3/4 of a mile from each other. If you know anything about solar energy, it's not like you have to have a zone around a house because that house is soaking up the solar from a huge, okay, they're only using the solar that falls onto that panel.
Right.
There's no scientific reason whatsoever for a 3/4 of a mile buffer zone, okay? But the electric companies were behind funding a proposal to basically only allow a very, very small amount of solar. And it was worded in such a way that an idiot would think that, well, yeah, there's got to be a scientific reason for that. Okay. And there is none. So, yeah, you've got the power companies spending large amounts of money because when you start putting solar panels on top of people's houses, they start to be in a position to control their own energy future. They are hooked up to the grid, but they're starting to be able to control their own future. And yes, the utility companies, the for-profit utility companies, are in a panic.
Well, and I talked to somebody earlier today, and we were discussing the fact that, he's a finance person, and we got into talking about how the government is kind of changing in things. And he thinks that there's going to be another market collapse in March of this year because inflation is going to get higher. And, while they gave raises to people on, Social Security disability and Social Security, it's not enough to cover inflation. And so you have schools, public schools that are now, they're having a hard time finding teachers because the teachers aren't wanting to go back. I mean, there's a lot of fragmentation here, including people not wanting to go work at a normal job that they used to work at.
What I would like to see happen as a result of my book is not that I'm going to make $1 million, because that ain't going to happen. But what I'd like to see as a result of my book is I explain what corruption is and how it works. And I have one specific idea about how we could end it in a single election cycle. And this requires voters coming to the awareness that for the US House of Representatives, the primary election that happens in the summer, basically, is the election. Okay? And a small number of voters have incredible leverage. I don't need to have 51% of the voters reach enlightenment. Okay? I need about 5% of voters to reach enlightenment. But it's got to be a mix of Democrats and Republicans. And what they agree to has to be specific and specifically worded in writing as far as what it is they're going to do. If we elected that majority to the US House of Representatives, and if they stood together, they could go to the highest authority in our political system and insist and require that it be passed. That is, they could go to the public. Okay? The public outranks the Supreme Court and the president. Okay? We elect a majority and they come together. Firstly, that House majority should, as a body, demand from the Speaker of the House that these pieces of legislation must come up for a vote, because otherwise they would be shelved and never see the light of day. Okay? And the Speaker of the House would say, you people are all freshmen. You may represent a majority, but you have no power until you are either the Speaker of the House or the heads of committees. Those are the only people in Congress who have the authority to bring a vote forward, bring a bill forward for a vote. This majority could, and I believe would, walk out, go on strike, meet thousands of demonstrators who were there in Washington, and not by coincidence, on the issue of corruption and money in politics. And they'd say, we are standing with these people who are demonstrating, who are a small percentage of the people who put us in office to keep this promise. And we cannot keep it without you. We are going on strike. The House of Representatives does not have a quorum without us. They can do no business for their corporate masters without us. Okay? We are stopping the government until the government agrees to do what the majority elected to have done. Okay? And I believe that if a majority in the House was to go on strike and declare to the people, you have to rise up, okay? Because the government and the Senate, they know that the mass of people that they're supposed to govern can rise up against them, and it's the scariest thing in the world to them, okay? And if the people went, wait, we have a majority in Congress who will do our bidding on the issue of corruption, I never believed that could happen. I'm going to engage. I'm going to be part of this, not violence, okay? But I'm going to be part of an uprising. And we'd take down the switchboard and we would jam the Washington Mall from the Lincoln Memorial all the way up to the Capitol, okay?
Without guns.
Without guns, without violence, without threats, okay? But with a single voice, Republicans, Democrats, hell, even libertarians, okay? That's a joke. I've got libertarian friends. With one voice, say, wait, we're going to get big money out of politics. You people henceforth will work for the people and not for the corporations, okay? And I believe that Congress would cave on it.
They would, but here's the only fly in this ointment is the media that creates a distraction, the social media that creates a distraction. And so many people, just to keep food on their table at this point, are working 2 or 3 jobs. So at what point can you latch on to those people to get them to, dare I say, wake up, to pay
At the
attention?
point they realize that they actually have a majority in the House of Representatives who has signed on to specifically doing this. Because the problem is not that people don't care. It is not that they're apathetic. It's not that they're unaware. They don't recognize that they have the power.
Right.
Why did my flight resonate with millions of people? Because they didn't believe it could have happened. They didn't believe it was possible. Okay? My flight is a metaphor for the revolution that I don't want to see happen. Okay? We can do the impossible. Okay? It's in our power. The average person can do it. Okay? That's I'm not the brightest candle on the birthday cake, okay? That's what is significant about me is I did the impossible, and I'm telling the public they don't need a gyrocopter to do it, but they can do the impossible.
Well, that's the thing. We have to realize that we have a voice. And dare I say, COVID has kind of taken that oomph out of some people, because it's like, well, what am I going to do? You know?
Yes, but what you're doing has exploded.
Yeah.
We've gone from 1/3 of the people who listen to 2/3 of the people who are now listening to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much or how regularly, but I'm saying, wait, we're there. And so I'm going to be the happiest guy in the world if I get like several months or a year into this, and all of a sudden copycats start coming up with my idea on podcasts and acting as if it's their idea. Great. Okay. Go for it. Okay. If we wind up with 100 people talking about what I'm talking about, and then 1,000 people talking about it and doing it through the channels that the media does not control, okay, then this thing can catch fire. And I don't give a damn who gets credit for it.
Yeah. That's the thing, with podcasting, with YouTube. Well, YouTube somewhat. I mean, they can still censor you, but with podcasting, you do have a platform, you have a voice, and more people can tune in to what they want to hear. And they can tune in and learn. You have some people that are very staunch, like we've talked about, that are I'm totally right. I'm all about, being a conservative, and that's who I am. And I'm totally progressive. And you're always going to have that. And what we have to do is come together. And that's one thing I have said about a lot of topics that I've talked about is if we can find unity and come together, then we can be stronger and we can be a more civilized society. The problem is right now, especially when you look at, the reason I bring up the virus is because you look at the virus and that has not only isolated people, but it has divided people, because people are on one side or the other. And there's people in the middle that have their choice, but they're being ostracized just like the person that's not taking the vaccine. And some people that have taken are like, okay, whatever, it's a person's choice. But then you have people that are hardcore going, no, I'm dragging my feet in the ground. You're going to kill us all. Are we really? We've gone through pandemics before in this world and we're survived.
What I'm talking, I mean, I did Hannity's show.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm doing conservative blogs. Okay. Mm-hmm. And my attitude with a conservative blogger is I'm progressive. I'm not going to apologize for that. And I'm not going to swerve from that. But we got an hour. We can talk about the things we disagree with, or we can talk about the thing that I believe we agree completely on. Okay? So it's your podcast. Take it wherever you want. But if I'm dealing with a conservative podcaster, I tell them, I am not your enemy. Okay? What I want to do is I think what you also believe we should do. Mm-hmm. All right? So do you want to go there, or shall we go talk about January 6th and Donald Trump? Okay? Your podcast. We can go there. We'll waste the whole thing, but
right.
Show.
And I mean, if we can find more common ground and have more open discussions about common ground and things that matter to all of us, then I think we can see the whole. But we need to get past the divisiveness that media and the media and social media create. Because, before my husband passed, I would sit there and post memes. And yes, some of them were not friendly. I was trying to sway somebody's opinion. But the truth is, I was just shouting into the void. Nobody was really paying attention to me. It was inciting some people. I lost friends. My dad and I quit talking for a bit because of it. And the whole fact of the matter is, when all was said and done, I realized it's not worth my time. I'm not changing anybody's opinion. But if we have something like this that is not divisive, and we can actually have an open discussion because we all agree we need to get money out of politics, then we can actually talk.
Okay. Imagine the election cycle where you have got an honest Democrat in one district who's trying to unseat the incumbent, and he's adjoining a Republican district, which happens more often than not. Okay. And in the Republican district, you've got an honest Republican who's trying to unseat the crooked Republican. These guys could appear with each other in these adjoining districts. And they could say, this is John Smith. He's running over in District 7. I hate him because he believes this, and this. Okay. And the only reason I'm not punching him in the nose, he's standing right here. Okay. The only reason I'm not punching him in the nose is that we agree on getting big money out of politics specifically. And on that, I can work with him. And when we get big money out of politics, he and I will agree to disagree, but we're going to have a level of trust. If he lives up to what he's promised, which is the same thing I promised, and if I live up to my word, we're going to realize we are trustworthy people with different opinions about how to go about things. And if I have an idea for a bill and I want a Democrat to co-sponsor it, I can go to this person. It doesn't mean I'm going to budge one bit on my beliefs and our beliefs. I won't. And I'm not asking him to either. But you take big business away from the table so that they don't control the outcome from the get-go. We can hammer out something.
Well, and what you're saying is perfectly true. I mean, if you think about the way that politics used to work years ago, our politicians could come to a common ground and make a choice. We weren't hearing every other month, oh, we're shutting the government down now because I'm not getting my. Are you toddlers that you have to stamp your feet because you're not getting your way? I mean, it's like you don't care if it's going to affect everybody else. And that's, where we can't have people in power that do not know how to negotiate and talk and come to a common agreement. We can't.
Do not have the power. What used to happen in votes in Congress is that there was a portion of Democrats who would sometimes go over and vote with the Republicans. Okay. And there was a portion of Republicans who would vote strictly on the merit of a bill. And they would sometimes say, look, the value, the good that's in this bill weighs the bad, the things that we disagree with. And so you'd wind up with defections that would happen there. You didn't have the total party control and the idea that any bill would ever come up where it was 100% votes of this party for and 100% votes of that party against. That didn't ever happen. It wouldn't be possible to bring up a bill that didn't have some across the aisle support. And right now, because the parties control who will make it to Congress, okay? Because when a seat's opening up in the state of Florida, the Democrats in Florida decide who the candidate is going to be, okay? They hook him up with the money. And the fact that there's going to be an open seat doesn't mean it's open at all. It's preordained. If it's a blue district, it's the Democratic Party who decides who the candidate is going to be. Take the parties out of it. I'm talking about taking the party's money out of elections.
Yeah.
The Democrats would not be allowed, they would support their candidates. They would not be allowed to do so with money. They wouldn't be allowed to threaten to withhold money if somebody decided that they were willing to vote with the Republicans. You
the
want to get the
whole
candidates from the people.
the whole Bernie Sanders, him running, the Democrats were up in arms because he's not really a Democrat. He caucused with the Democrats. He wasn't truly a Democrat, but he caucused with them. And they were all up in arms because he's not a true Democrat. And then you have now the Republican Party kind of eating itself in a way because of the Trump politicians that are coming into play now. So our political system is even changing even more because are you going to see the Republican Party fracture, or are you just going to see it morph into something else?
I've written about this in my partisan self more than I want to discuss.
Okay, don't worry about that. I just
No, I believe you're onto something profound there. Okay. The problem with a cult of personality is what happens when that personality goes away.
Mhm.
Donald Trump, like other authoritarian leaders, they don't tend to build a successorship because it's ego driven. They don't want to envision the idea that anybody would ever replace them. Okay. And you wind up with a half a dozen or a dozen people who are hoping to inherit the power. And that's why a lot of these dictatorships, the ones that are particularly cults, they do disintegrate in a very ugly fashion afterwards. Uh, I don't see that it can last, and what it will morph into. Oh hell, I'm going to say it. What it's going to morph into is this: you're going to have really racist, violent, ugly people who will move to a faction. They'll even start their own party if they have to. When their cult leader is gone, they're not going to give up. But the rest of the Republican Party is going to want to build something that has a future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what'll happen is the Republican Party, which is already the smallest party, is going to become even smaller because the cultists will take their ball and leave the field. Okay. What will happen is the Republican Party, in order to have power, after the departure of the really, really zany end, are going to have to move to the center because they're going to have to, instead of being, because the extremists have voluntarily left, in order to establish 50%, they're going to move way, way, way into the middle. So you're going to have a Republican Party that's moderate, okay, an extremist group that has no power, and the Democrats who are going to become a whole lot more liberal. So the result of what we're into with the cult of personality is actually going to be a gift to progressive policies in the long run because it's going to split, and the Republican structure, in order to try and survive, is going to have to move to the center.
And
that's my prediction.
That makes sense. I mean, you do have the extremists, and here's the thing: the more extreme their statements are, it's only going to make the progressives and the regular Republicans look sane. And this was always something that amazed me when Trump was running. And I mean, I know Stewart said there's no way Trump was going to get in, and a lot of people said there was no way he was getting in. But I often said, to people that I knew that were, oh, I like Trump, and I've never liked Trump. Never, even back in the 1980s when I first saw him, I didn't like him. And my statement to them was, you think a man who has a golden toilet is going to know what and how to take care of you? I mean, just the thought, the man has gold everywhere. His bathroom is gold. He has a golden toilet. How is he going to relate to you? How is he going to understand your plight? Oh, because he talks off the cuff like your drunk uncle? I mean.
Trump's attraction is that he voices the drunk uncle type of hate without making any great effort to conceal it. His claim to fame is that he hated Obama because he's black. Okay. The birtherism thing is what propelled him to political popularity. Okay. And there is no basis for that birtherism thing except to try and deny a black man legitimacy in the White House. And it's purely racial.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there was no concealing the racist basis of Trumpism from the get-go. All right. And he's popular with a lot of people who do not consider themselves to be racist. Okay. But in my opinion, these people who do not consider themselves to be racist have a deep-seated expectation that white males should be ruling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it comes out in a lot of. There was a discussion with, I forget who was talking about school boards and school board meetings and what's going on. And in the phrasing of it, they talked about parents and black parents. Default parents are white. Normal parents are white. Parents, when you use the generic term parents, you're talking about white parents because you have to specify in the conversation that black parents are something different than generic or normal parents. And some people who are taking apart, they're going, you didn't hear what they just said. Okay, it's subliminal. But when you take it apart, they said parents and black parents. What does that say? Okay.
Yeah.
White parents are normal. White parents are the norm. So these people who do not believe that they're racist themselves and wouldn't ever do anything overtly against a black person for their race still have this belief and expectation that white males are the ones who should be running the show. All right. And that's so deep seated. And wait, I'm an old white guy. I had to root it out, and I still do. Okay, I make no claims to being perfect on that point, but I admit that it's there, and I do root it out. And if I do step on my own tongue with something that's really insensitive, I acknowledge it and I apologize for it. And that's the most any white old person can do.
I had a younger guy who reached out to the show to be a guest, and I signed him and booked him. And then he sends me an email saying, this is the questions you're allowed to ask me. This is how I want the interview to go. And my response to him was, you know what? I don't think you're a good fit. This is I hate to say it, but this is my house. You don't come into my house and say, this is how I'm in charge now because I'm a white guy, because I'm going to tell you to see yourself out.
I told you before you hit the
Yeah.
record button, this is your show. I'm going to follow your lead.
Oh, and I appreciate that. But I mean, there are some, usually if I know that about somebody coming in, and I have a rapper that wants to be on the show, but he has made some comments about me that he has no idea who I am. And he went after the race card because I'm a white woman. And my last 3 guests had been African-American. It was like, dude, what? And he's in Nigeria. So he's like, well, maybe it's because I'm in Nigeria. I'm like, no, I don't have a time to book you just yet. But he wanted it right then and there. So then he pulls up, well, maybe it's because I'm black. And I'm like, no, I grew up in New Orleans. At one point, I had nothing but African-American friends because I was the only white kid in the neighborhood. So don't come at me with that BS.
When I was first in prison,
Mm-hmm.
And it was in that first week, my bunkie was a black guy and no Boy Scout. He told me he did a year in solitary because he was accused of knifing somebody in another prison.
Okay.
But I had a good feeling about just the back and forth between him and me. So it was about a week after I was in the prison, a couple of the white guys came by and said, Doug, we're not trying to stir anything up, but we just wanted to ask if you're okay about your bunking situation. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're here with Drew. Does that bother you or make you uncomfortable? Drew being the black guy.
Yeah.
And I thought about it for a minute and I went, I got good vibes from Drew and he's black. And if I ask to be moved so that I have no idea who I'm going to get. Okay. I said, no, I'll stick with Drew. Okay. And they said, all right, that's cool. There was not the expectation that I had to move, but they were just saying, we know who to ask in order to get you reassigned. And I said, no, we don't have to. And that was the end of it. Now, I wound up working down in the kitchens, which Drew damn near ran the kitchen. And I'm down there working, and the way the prison was set up is that everybody was isolated on their floor. There were no common areas. There's no common dining area. There was no common gym. Each floor was self-contained, and you ate on your floor, which meant that the food was trucked up in these big metal heat wagons, okay, on casters. So what we did out in the kitchens, we prepared the food in volume, and then we portioned it down to trays, and the trays were handed out for people to eat. Well, it meant that 3 times a day we had like, I forget how many floors, 12, 13 floors of these that had to go up and then they had to come back down when they were through. They had to be cleaned out and recycled to go. So we had this parade of these steel warming bins on casters, and everybody had to turn to send them back to be washed. And some idiot who was further up there, as I'm moving them down the line, got his hand caught between them.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah.
He got his hand pinched and his nose out of whack. And I'm sorry, these things are not clear plastic. They're metal. I can't see through them.
Right.
All right. So he's swearing up one side and down the other. And he's like 3 of these up from where I am, and he's going to come around to beat the crap out of me, which would have landed us both in solitary, which I hadn't experienced yet and didn't want to. And so he's coming around, and before he gets to me, out of the corner of my eye, here comes Drew, flying in, his hand up in this guy's face, going, he said he's sorry. That's it. Back off. Okay. And I don't know for sure that Drew was known, but this guy went from full mad to okay with me in a half a second. But like I said, Drew had knifed a guy in another prison, or was accused. I never asked him.
Or rumor has it. How do you build cred in prison? You start a rumor.
It ended, okay. So yeah, Drew paid me back, okay, and he didn't know that I had decided to stay there, and he probably wouldn't have considered it any great gift that I did, okay. But by the time we had been bunking together for a few months, he didn't care that I was white. Nobody was going to beat the shit out of me, not for an honest mistake. Okay, that was that. So it's funny, if you're straight up in your relationships with people on a racial basis, you really don't know how it's going to come back to you.
No, and I mean, we are all people. That's the thing that we really need to step back, and we're all people. We're all having an experience, and it's our color of our skin shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't.
It's
I know
ugly.
it does.
It's ugly and racial in some prisons.
I know.
Explained to me that in a lot of other prisons where they have a large prison population that's mixed, it all polarizes into 3 gangs. There's a Hispanic, a black, and a white gang. And if you decide you're not part of one of them, you're fair game for all of them.
Yeah.
This was the environment that Drew was in when somebody reportedly got knifed, but that was the game that they were all in and all playing at that time. So it can get really ugly where we were, because we only had about 120 people on one wing and 120 people on the same floor on the other wing. That polarization, it didn't have the fissionable mass, okay? And because it didn't have it, there was no great urge to feed it. In other words, Drew was perfectly happy not to be in an environment where he was afraid for his life.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, his true self, in my opinion, is what I saw when he was my bunkie, which was not ugly racist.
Right. Well, I mean, if you want to look back, since we're talking about the justice system for a bit, real quick, the fact is that we've had the police departments and such infiltrated by the KKK members, and this is why we have, the defund the police. I'm not all about defunding the police. I think we should demilitarize the police. There's no reason, officer friendly should be driving down the street in a tank. There's no reason for you need to have all the tactical gear that you do. You're a police officer. And I understand there's a lot of life threatening things. And I understand that there are people that have guns. I get all of that. But we should be spending money on how to train our police officers to de-escalate situations like they used to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I would like to see all cops required for some time, required to walk a beat.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is getting to know people. I would like to see all cops required and paid to spend some of their time in community service, like athletics, okay, where they are the leader in a basketball team or whatever, but particularly where they are being asked to work in groups that are not their natural group.
Yeah.
So if it's a black cop, he should work with white kids, okay? And this should be part of their duties. They should spend time, and I don't mind that it's paid time, in the community, because cops hang with cops too much.
They hang with cops too.
They develop a groupthink like politicians, where they are separate from who they're supposed to serve, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the fact that you've had so many murders by police officers that shouldn't have happened. I have a friend who, she was on her way to work, and she was going to work at like 5 o'clock in the morning. She's African American, and she got pulled over by a female cop. And this is in Crystal Lake. She got pulled over by a female cop, and the female cop started off the whole thing with, well, you made an illegal turn without a blinker. She's like, I didn't change lanes or anything. She's like, well, you made that. I need to see this. Then they said that she stole the car. It was her car. By this point, when she said that the car was stolen, they called in 2 other police cars plus the captain. Finally, after 2 hours, and she was late for work, they admitted that they were wrong and apologized. But by this point, she's like over her skis, because how do you, so she told her job, I can't come in, I can't open anymore, I can't do this. She has a couple of grown sons, and she's like, the son comes home, he's like, I saw this red Mustang, I really want this red Mustang. And she's like, no, you can't have that, because it's a cop magnet, you can't do that. Now, why is that? Why does somebody have to be prosecuted and chased down and profiled because of their skin color? Why can't, if I had a son and he wanted granted, I would say, no, you're going to get a ticket because you're going to speed. That's all you want the Mustang for. But the whole fact of the matter, it's not that. That's not why she's saying that. She's saying that because she sees that as, you're going to get stopped. They're going to say you stole it. And why is that? We're still living in that mentality of, dare I say, back in the 50s and 60s, where a boy come here. And it's like, that's not where we need to be. It isn't.
On Facebook, I posted a meme on Eleanor Roosevelt, who, when she was First Lady, quit the Daughters of the American Revolution because they wouldn't let a black woman, Ella Fitzgerald, sing. And she invited Ella Fitzgerald to sing at a ceremony at the Washington Monument, which was attended by 70,000 people. That was Eleanor Roosevelt middle finger to the Daughters of the American Revolution. So I posted this on Facebook, and one person replied that that's cute, that's nice, but racism doesn't exist anymore. Okay. And My reply to that was two short sentences. I said, "Let me guess, you're not black." Okay.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, there are people who feel an obligation when they're looking at a meme like that to say, yeah, but racism is over. We've had a black president, therefore that proves there is no racism anymore. Okay.
Something very telling about Facebook. So I posted an article about the Tulsa bombing. You know what I'm talking about, where they had the uprising, they bombed the black community, and
Yes.
Facebook tells me 2 years after the fact, this is fake. So we hit it. All right. And I'm thinking to myself, really? And I'm like, I could argue with Facebook, but I really don't want to take the time. Then about 2 months later, so actually 2 months ago, they said to me, oh, actually, it is a true story. So why did you say it was fake to begin with? I mean, I had no knowledge that, in an African American school back in the day, that they had a different Pledge of Allegiance and a different song, that, that they didn't have the song that we sing. They had a different song. And I was talking to my friend and I'm like, how? She's like, no, this is what we used to sing. And I'm like, are you serious? Because we don't know that. We are not taught that history.
There was not somebody I know personally, but I heard about somebody who grew up in Tulsa, went through the entire Tulsa educational system. He said, we were never taught what happened in Tulsa. It is a complete hole in that Oklahoma history. Okay. It happened and it's completely suppressed.
Well,
This is what is causing some teachers, not all teachers who are coming back, but this is causing some teachers not to come back to teach. Because if they teach the truth, they can easily wind up in the middle of a controversy about not whether or not it's true, but whether or not they're allowed to teach it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because teaching about Tulsa would be construed by some parents as you're trying to get white students to hate themselves
Mm-hmm.
over their racial heritage. No, we just don't think that you can deny that it happened, which is what they want the school system to do, so that you feel good about your race. Okay, this also would extend to teaching about what Rosa Parks did, or
Central
and
Park.
the name.
Central
What?
Park was, Central Park was not a park. It was totally different, but people see Central Park and they don't know the history of it.
And some people don't want it to be known.
No.
And for me as a white person to know the true history of America, that does not mean I am less of a person. Okay. Um, so who are these people who are so desperate to suppress the truth?
Well, let me ask you this. Why do all our textbooks, why are they basically coming from Texas? Why do we have one center? Because Texas is the biggest state. Oh, and we want to have everybody on the same page of learning. Well, and I know the whole statement of victor, the victor goes the spoils. Well, if we're whitewashing history literally, there's a problem there because we're not getting the full picture. And when you think about it, you're teaching American history, at least for my generation. We learned American history in 1 year. How can you cram over 200 years of history into 1 year and truly understand?
Well, it means that there's not enough time for you to understand how Texas came into being in the United States. It was Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The revolution where Americans took Mexican territory from Mexico stems from the fact that Mexico was leaning towards a rule that would have prohibited slavery in any of Mexico's territories. Now, Mexico wanted to settle Texas, and they had invited Americans to come to Mexico, and they're going to give them free land as long as they're basically homesteading. okay,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they develop the land.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of Americans had, I mean, like famous Davy Crockett,
Yeah.
like, you know, Americans had moved in because I was like, whoa, I can get hundreds of acres of land, good land, near water. Okay. I'm going to have myself the biggest friggin' plantation in Texas, staffed with slaves. And so they resettled to
Mm-hmm.
their homestead, and they find out that they're not going to be able to buy slaves to build their plantation. And so they revolted against the country that gave them free freaking land,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and took the territory, all of it, not just their homestead. The Alaska is territorially larger than Texas, but I think that's the only state. Okay,
Yeah.
they took that much land violently to preserve slavery, and it ain't the way it was taught when I was grade school.
No, no. And I mean, I learned Louisiana history in 8th grade. So I learned about the Louisiana Purchase and all that great stuff and how we got cobbled down. And when you want to look at the Constitution, which this actually morphs into the Constitution conversation because it's the whole, right to bear arms for a well-armed militia. Well, that was all put in there because the slave owners were like, hey, I need guns because I need to be able to track down my slaves. And that was the only way they could ratify the Constitution because some of our founding fathers had slaves.
And they were intimidating slaves.
Mm-hmm.
They had slave patrols.
Yep.
Okay. These slave patrols were not official police. They weren't officially part of the state of Georgia, but they were organized to terrorize the Black communities, particularly to search them for the possible accumulation of weapons, because they were afraid of a racial uprising against whites that would be as violent against the whites as what they were currently conducting against the Blacks.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were afraid that a federal government that was sympathetic to the actual concept of equality might restrict the slave patrols in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And these were militias. They were not official parts of the state government. Okay. So it had to be loosely defined militias.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my personal, and I'm a felon, so I can't own a gun. But my personal belief is that yes, a person should be able to obtain a weapon for their self-defense in their own home. Taking that weapon out of your home is a different game altogether, okay? Because if you are an idiot with a gun and you take it into the community, it's too easy for you to misread the situation and turn something into a shooting gallery, and you may not be able to hit a barn if you're in it.
Right.
Okay. So I am for the right to keep and bear arms, but I'm like, wait, the bigger the gun, and if you're taking it in public, it should require training, licensing, and the proof of competency on a regular basis.
And insurance.
Okay? And insurance, yes. Okay. So all of these things can be done, and it needs to be taught to anybody who owns a weapon that you're taking on a legal liability.
Mm-hmm.
If you screw up, you will go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to own a gun, but if you choose to own a gun, you have volunteered to take a risk. You shoot somebody, you can go on trial. You can go to jail. Okay? You are not allowed legally to make a mistake with a firearm. You buy it, you take on the responsibility for never using it wrong, which should also be applied to law enforcement, and recently was in the tragic case of that woman who misunderstood her firearm for a taser, but it was her job to get it right. All right. And I say tragic. I don't celebrate her going to jail. I don't think it was deliberate. All right. It was tragic. But you don't get to carry a weapon and make a mistake with it and say, oh, gee.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, okay, you can go buy a gun. Nope. Granted, you have to go through background checks and everything, but you can buy a gun. But in order to drive a car and be licensed to drive a car, you have to be tested. You have to have your vision checked. You have to have, you have to take a driving test. You have to take a written test. And you have to have insurance, and you are accepting liability. So you are aware, and you are aware that you need to do certain things to your car to maintain it. But a gun, which can also kill somebody, just like a car could, you don't have to do anything. You're not required to get any training. Now in Illinois,
the insurance industry can wind up setting the rates based on the degree of risk that they are taking by insuring this person. So a person would be required to disclose what their political associations were, and they're legally liable if they lie. So if they're part of the Proud Boys, okay, and you're an insurance company, you're like, whoa, I'm not going to insure this bozo.
Yeah.
Okay. Or as you said, it because of their association. But if they lie about their associations and they use a weapon and it comes out in trial, all of a sudden they've committed a different crime consistent with lying to the bank about if you do a bank application for a loan, you commit a felony if you're fraudulent. Okay, it is a felony fraud to lie. Okay, so the insurance companies can start saying, yeah, this person has proved their competence with a weapon. They are proving that they're going to the gun range to practice on a regular basis. They have shown in written examinations that they understand the legal concepts and the risk that they're taking by owning a weapon. Okay, so the more responsible somebody is, the lower the risk. And the more they are the person you don't want to have owning a gun, the more they wind up creating, either they have to pay through the nose or they create a legal liability for themselves before they even fire that weapon by lying about who they are and what they are. Hell yes.
Well,
and this completely respects the right to keep and bear arms, which I don't have.
Well, and here's the thing I was going to say, when you look at the situation up in Wisconsin where the guy drove into the crowd and they allege it's an accident. And I'm saying this the way it was framed out on TV, that it was an accident, even though the guy has 2 prior incidences of doing this. Here's the thing that nobody really wants to talk about is the fact that because he deliberately drove into that, it's an intentional act. And depending on the car insurance company, and the only reason I say depending, because technically, based on policy language, intentional acts are not covered. So back to your gun theory, if I ended up saying I wasn't a Proud Boy and it turned out I was, I can deny your claim based on intentional act, not only fraud, but intentional act. So there's no coverage. And that's the thing that I think the media wants to skew this thing in Wisconsin, that it was an accident, because then you can kind of play favor to the insurance company saying, well, this is a big liability. If you're going to have to afford coverage, otherwise you're going to look really bad. But if I say it's an intentional act, there's no coverage. I'm sorry, you're done. And I've denied claims because it was an intentional act. Not that I'm proud of that, but I have had done it because somebody was speeding along the shoulder of the road. My insurance like, well, I don't like that. I'm going to go after him and cut him off. And so they play his passing game and they get in an accident. And I have to tell my insurance, so you were deliberately doing this? Yes. Well, it was an intentional act. So therefore, I'm sorry, but there's no coverage.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't think about, that if they're like, well, I'm just going to go get revenge. Well,
it doesn't work that way.
No. And I don't think we're taught enough in school to know how things work. And I think we should have a better government class in school. But once again, do they want us to know how everything really works?
And this is where they are, by putting the pressure on the school boards as they are, as publicly and as belligerently as they are, they're trying to discourage and inhibit teachers from taking the risk of getting into trouble by teaching the truth. So yes, they'll skip the history of Texas. Okay? They'll figure it out when they get older, or they won't. But I'm not going to wind up having to defend my job, or wind up being on the receiving end of hate calls, or have my kids threatened because I told the truth about Texas.
Right.
Okay. So regardless of the outcome, if they can get the teachers to tone down the truth, then they get what they're after. And it's very deliberate, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know that you're going to see a change in that. Hopefully you will. I think as much as some things on social media are bad, because of social media, we are learning some truths that maybe, have been buried for a long time. And not everything on the internet is true. I know that, but sometimes it does give you food for thought, and it prods you to dig further.
I'm very much for free speech, but I don't believe that free speech should include deliberately lying, deliberately mass disseminating falsehoods, known falsehoods.
Agree.
Now, we've got a couple of lawyers for Donald Trump who should and may lose their licenses for the frivolous lawsuits that they brought with no basis of fact where they contested the outcome of the election. Okay? Mm-hmm. And they're saying, well, we're not established to establish a factual basis for bringing a suit. And these states are going, oh, yeah, this is new to us. According to legal precedent, yes, you as the lawyer cannot just willy-nilly make up stuff, okay, put it into a brief and submit it to the courts for action, either knowing that it's false or with no reason to think that it could be true. All right? You as a lawyer should be putting your right to practice law on the line. Okay? You should have to have done a reasonable amount of research. They didn't do research. They invited complaints and they said, we've got a binder full of, as it turns out, 1,200 lies from 1,200 different people who were solicited to tell stories. And they never checked out a single one of them for any credibility. And they're saying on the sheer volume of complaints, then they can throw the election into a suspended status where it can't be certified.
But isn't this just a way for that cult that we were talking about to appease that cult? Let's think about, we'll just say Rudy, because I'm sure that's one of the people you're talking about. This man, he was such a hero in 9/11. He was such a name thing, and now he's become a punchline. And what does he really have to think about practicing law? Do you really think he cares? He's got enough money. If he can appease his master and gin up some support from the little faction over here, then he's done his job. And if he loses his license, he loses his license. It goes back to he has nothing to lose.
It is going to bug him, mere bug eyes. It is going to bother him that he is buried as a punchline. Okay. He had hoped to rise to the top of an authoritarian government, mm-hmm. where he was at the right-hand side of the king, okay? And the fact that it was done with no democratic legitimacy whatsoever didn't bother him, okay? Now, he got kicked out of a prestigious law firm in New York when he started to represent Donald Trump because he started telling demonstrable lies, particularly about the practice of law, okay? And his law partners went, you're out of here. It wasn't because they hated Trump.
Right.
It was like, wait, you have stepped away from the true path of practicing law, okay? And they kicked him out. And now the state of New York has done the same thing, okay? And he is named in a $1 billion lawsuit for the lies that he said about the election companies. And
this might answer your question. According to Wikipedia, a company,
excuse me,
is a legal entity representing or a mixture of both, with a specific objective. Company members share a common purpose and unite to achieve specific, declared goals.
Excuse me, I was interrupted, and I don't know if it was from your end or my end.
It wasn't from my end. I'm not sure.
All of a sudden, I had something that was.
I heard it, but
reciting-
it's not from my end.
Okay. By the way, I have hearing aids, and
Okay.
I'm plugged in instead of using headphones. I've got hearing
Okay.
aids that are wired in, and I had excuse me, I had something. just
That's
click it
okay.
out.
I
I
can
had
cut it out.
something-
So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately this is going to be a mark in history, the way this whole thing has morphed into the cult and how, how we see the Republican Party end up splitting. And Giuliani, while he was America's mayor at one point, he's no longer that. And everybody sees him for who he is.
And who he degenerated into. Although he was never my cup of tea.
Me neither.
At one time, he was crime fighting in New York City, and he was incredibly vain as mayor, but he was not inactive. He tried to do things, many of which had constructive effects. Okay, but now he has discarded the structure of democracy because he only wants power, and I believe in the majority. I believe in rule by the majority. And that process is coming under attack like never in my lifetime.
Well, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's
Trump came way too close to it.
Yeah.
And we're still dealing with a lot of people who are in the dark about what happened, who do not want to know, but are content with and it's really funny, they talk about a daddy government taking care of everybody, but they want a big daddy who's going to take care of them with a heavy fist. Okay. It's an odd contradiction that they want Daddy Trump, they want the heavy fist, and they want to look away from any injustices as long as they're not done to white males.
Well, and they want to scream about socialism, that socialism's a bad thing, but the army, the police force, the fire department are all socialist, organizations. So, it's like, I think because we don't teach far enough and we label these words and then we go into our own little zone, we listen to what the talking head says and ignore what things really mean.
Very much true. Nazi is specific. Fascist is something different. Capitalism and socialism refer to economic systems. They're not mentioned in the Constitution. Okay? Free enterprise has a specific meaning, and it's not the corporate rule that we live under. Okay? Free enterprise means encouraging competition. The system that we're in is, God, the bank that I had 22 years ago has been bought at least 6 times. Okay?
Yep.
6 times. That my bank has changed its name. Okay? And it's not because they are being moved around. The number of banks is going down in number. Okay, this is a small fish being swallowed by a larger fish being swallowed by a larger fish, and we are getting back into economic entities that are too big to fail and have so much clout that they know they can dictate to government on subjects of economics because a failure would end the economic system that we're in. All right. Now, go back to FDR's day, these banks, thousands and thousands of banks, were all local institutions, all of them insured, and the failure of any 1, 2, or 6 of them didn't have the slightest ripple. Okay. But now we're to where Chase and Bank of America, okay, are either one of them larger than the entire economic system that we had in the 1930s.
Well,
individual bank.
Yeah. And like my bank has been bought out just like yours. At least I can name 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And if you actually dig into the paperwork, it's just because it has the boilerplate name of what the bank is, US Bank. When they first transferred over, it's like it's owned by the Bank of Scotland. What?
Yeah.
How? So it's one of those things where it's like, and I don't know that that's still the case because I think another sale happened somewhere, but it was just kind of like, how? And I mean, I do have a credit union. I do also have a credit union. So you're dealing with a credit union, you're dealing with local, you're dealing with small, and it goes back to the FDR bank. It's something small. It's an easy, it's a more insured safety net, I guess. But the people that work there, it's not something that's so corporate that it's going to get blown away. And yeah, we are headed back to too big to fail, because they don't, we have politicians in there that are allowing this to happen over and over and over again. And I often go back to the movie Wall Street. I go back to the movie Wall Street, where the one line in the movie Wall Street, greed is good. And Oliver Stone said, I didn't do this as a template, but that's exactly what it's turned into.
The thing is, the corporations who talk about free enterprise are working completely the opposite direction, in fact, okay? Instead of competition, they're trying to suppress competition. Instead of government working for the people to protect the people, they want it to be so skewed that Congress has to jump when the president of Chase Bank says jump, okay?
Yeah.
And Jamie Dimon was subpoenaed to testify before, I forget which committee it was, okay? And he made the Congress jump through hoops about when and where he was willing to appear.
Yeah.
Okay. And when he appeared, the questions that he got from almost everybody, and you can guess who wasn't polite, they were kissing his ring.
Okay? Softball questions.
Okay. But you look at how the super PAC for Chase works is all the executives are encouraged to participate in a super PAC that is run by another member of the bank who reports to Jamie Dimon, okay? So they can voluntarily give money to the super PAC or not. And yes, it will be known if you're in the category of not, because they give you the option of being able to directly deposit monthly, so it's painless, from your paycheck to a super PAC. Okay? Now, this super PAC is accumulating tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And guess who controls hundreds of millions of dollars of super PAC money that can be given or withheld to candidates for Congress after Citizens United? Jamie Dimon.
Yeah.
So when he comes from Chase to report to Congress to give them answers to questions, they can't kiss his ass well enough. Okay? You take away the money power that he has built into his system with his employees to create a super PAC that Congress knows he individually controls. Okay? And by the way, Elizabeth Warren doesn't get contributions.
Yeah, I know. I like
that.
I liked Elizabeth, and
yeah.
There's two questions. This is going to be the longest podcast I've ever done, but there are two questions. That's fine. There's two questions I have. So you were a mailman at the time of this. What happened with that job afterwards?
I never worked another day delivering mail.
I didn't think so. Well, I did notice that you had the mail insignia on your little gyrocopter.
Oh, I was working for the post office at that time, and I had moved everything out of the post office before I made the flight because I knew I'd never be let back in the building. They suspended me for a few months while they investigated, and they told me that they were going to send me a certified letter because they had decided to fire me, and the certified letter said that I was officially terminated the day after I received the letter, and I received the letter on July 3rd. So I was officially fired on the 4th of July, and I thought they didn't have a sense of humor. And I did wind up getting my benefits, thanks to the union. And I qualified for Social Security a few months after that, which is not the pot of gold, but
No, I know.
it definitely helped. And I went to prison
Yeah.
a year after that, which would have given them grounds. Okay, but they
Yeah.
didn't want to wait. It was funny. My first on-camera interview was done with Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos, and he asked me, he said, "What do you think is going to happen to your gyrocopter?" I said, "I think they're going to melt it down and make beer cans out of it," which resulted in him commenting that I have a quirky sense of humor. But that's pretty much what they did.
Yeah.
Okay, they did not sell it, which would have been normal procedure. They didn't give it to a museum, which is what I had wanted. They notified me after my time in prison that they had opted to destroy it.
Yeah, I would have thought a museum would have been, but then they would have to admit that there was fault somewhere in there that this happened. And you know, the one thing that people don't realize is the internet lasts forever. So no matter how much people forget, sometimes things have a way of coming back.
They wanted and hoped that prison would shut me up, and they hoped that destroying the gyrocopter would end that, but I know how to make another one.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you made one, I'm sure you can make another. And that's the thing. It's like, and I know even talking to you, most likely I'm putting myself on somebody's radar, but you know, it's life. And
I'd
we're
like
not
to think I was on somebody's radar. But the book,
flight plan.
I hope will jog somebody somewhere into taking effective action and awakening the minority of citizens, that it will take the small number of citizens who have to work in a coordinated way. All right. I am talking about way under 10% of the population, closer to 5%, possibly as little as 3% of the population.
Wow.
Could do this. All right. That's how small the number is. And I'm not looking to be famous, and I'm not looking to head up the parade. Okay. I know people who could. So that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm trying to put it out there. And if it takes off, then if before I die, we have a wall of separation between big money and our government, I'm content that my kids and yours will be able to handle the problems that come up.
Yeah. Well, the book is Flight Plan, for those who are curious, since we haven't really talked about the name of it. It's Flight Plan. All your links, your social links will be, you know, the links for the book and whatever will be in the actual show notes. Is there anything that we have not talked about that you would like to add? I kind of feel it's a loaded question.
I apologize, and I feel horrible about the editing job that I've left for you, because you're great and the conversation has been terrific. I don't know what you can take out.
Oh, well, no, it'll be fine. I may split it into two parts. I'm not sure, but you know, figure that out after, in post. But I do thank you. So while the show was a little bit political this time, a lot more political than normal, I think there was some good information, and I think it's something that we need to look at, is getting money out of politics. After we got off air, Doug and I talked about his book, Flight Plan, for a little bit. And he told me some of the anecdotal stories that are in there, you know, such as things he did actually talk once he landed. He actually talked to the police, the Washington, D.C. police, because he wanted to disarm the situation and let them know that he wasn't a terrorist. And the fact of the matter is, he actually brought humor to it. And because he brought humor to it and was honest, he ended up not having bail. He didn't have to post bail, which is kind of crazy when you think about what he did. But they realized what his message was. He even had some humorous stories about his wife and his 11-year-old daughter, because, you know, his wife and his daughter didn't know what was going on until after it all happened. So imagine being the person that's married to Doug, and all of a sudden you see your husband on TV. A little scary. And yes, guess what? They're still married, and his daughter's now in college. So it has a happy ending. But I think, the other thing he talked about with me afterwards was in the back of his book, he has organizations you can join to help try to get campaign finance reform going. And I think it is definitely an issue that we could stand on and make some changes in this world. And if we could get big money out of politics and have representation that represents us more than big finance companies and the big banks and moneyed interest, our country would be in a better place. So on that note, I'm going to step off the soapbox as always. It's been a long political drawn out one. And I'm sure you guys are like, some of you are going, wow, that was not what I needed. But hopefully you learned something about our government and about how our system works. And maybe you can see how you can make a difference. So if you have a question, comment, concern, and you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at Donna, DAUNA, at better2podcast.com. That's Donna at better2podcast.com. If you've missed an episode and you want to catch up, you can go to www.better2podcast.com. There you can find all of our social links. And like I said, you can leave a review also at Podchaser and Apple Podcast. But you can also just send me a review if you want, and I can post it on our website. So I thank you for tuning in as always. Hopefully you stuck through the whole podcast. And I guess I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye.
The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.